Hi everyone, Gustaw here. Today I'd like to show you how we can utilize the selected value and concatenate X functions if you want to create dynamic subtitles or titles. So let's treat this let section as a use case utilizing the single selection, and let's assume that this calls for using the multi-selection. So please take a look at the subtitles in both charts in the left section. So we have this single select slicer. It allows you to change the scenarios between the previous year and the target. And you can see that these selections are transferred into the subtitles. We also have the unit, we also have the date range. However, it's not so relevant for our today use case. The most relevant element here is like the concatenation of AC, which means the actuals and the one selected specific scenario. In that case, it's the abbreviated form of the target. So if we change from the target to the previous year, then we see the concatenation of actuals and previous year. So it's like the one basic scenario, which is actuals. It's like the default, it's our base. And the one which is selected that comes from the slicer selection, which is in that case previous year, we can change it to the target. And now we see that there is an actuals and the target. Let's quickly check how it works for the secondary use case placed on the right side. We have also the actuals, which is quite fixed in a subtitle. Nevertheless, we have these two elements dynamic corresponding to this slicer selection. So we are able to pick like any individual scenario selection. So now we only focusing on the target. So we see the target in the columns here. We have see the values for the target and deltas for the target in a table. Nevertheless, what's the most important for our today use case is this dynamic subtitle. Now it calls for the actuals and target. If you also select the previous year, now we also see that it's both the previous year and the target. So let's quickly check how it can be set up. So let's focus on a single selection as our first use case. Let's go quickly check what measure creates this dynamic subtitle. We can go to the general, to the title, to the subtitle. There is an FX button, and we can check what is the calculation used. So let's quickly find it. Let's quickly check how it's called once again, scenario single. So in that case, we have the unit which is fixed. Of course, it can be dynamic too. However, it's not so relevant. We have reference measure for the multi-selection for the date ranges. And what is most important, we have this additional reference measure for the single selection title, and we will go there just in a second. As a result variable, we just concatenate all of this, our elements, like what is the unit with the pipeline, which is our small divider, with the date range, with the pipeline, with the scenario. However, the scenario is what is most important for our today conversation. So let's quickly find out this formula and dive into this one. So this is like quite straightforward one, and it's applicable when you aim with displaying only a single selection. So in that case, what's the most important is just to use the selected value, and we are calling the column for our table scenario selection. So that one allows us, and it's actually used in our this particular filter, and we are able to check whether we would like to display the previous year or the target. You may also consider having more or different scenarios like the forecast, like rolling forecast, and so on. Like there is like a ton of different comparative metrics that you can choose from depending on your use case. Nevertheless, what's most important here is to just use the selected value. The fact that I also concatenating the selected value for the selected scenario with the AC is like one additional step. It all depends on whether you actually have these actuals in your table or in your charts or not. If you have this actual similar to this use case, you can of course use the fixed AC because it's always displayed in a table and a column as it is here. So it's like the fixed one, but then we are concatenated that with the phrase and with the selected scenario, which like is just a selected value. I also checking whether it's like blank or not blank, because if it's blank, I don't want to include that phrase and. So that's why I also have this one condition a little bit earlier on. Nevertheless, selected value is the most important, the most crucial part here. So this works well for the single selection, for the scenario as an example. But let's quickly dive into the logic behind having the multi-selection, as we can see here, when we can pick between the previous year and the target. So let's find out what's the measure used here, and it's the unit date, like very similar title with the one change, scenario multi. So this one is structured in the same way as previously, but this is the only difference, which is selected scenario multiple, this one. So instead now using the selected value, we are using the concatenate_x. It consists of the few elements within. So the first one we are calling for the specific table. In our case, is the table scenario selection. We are defining on which items from which columns should be concatenated. So in that case, it's the name. Name is just whatever we have here also in a slicer selection. So this is like the abbreviation of the scenarios, which in this case is the previous year target. It can be like any other benchmark and so on. Then we precising like what phrase should be used as a concatenation between those consecutive elements. So it can be also like the standard comma, and it also works fine. It can be also like the name, the text phrase as and, for example, as it is used here. So if we also check how the subtitle look like, there is an actuals and previous year and target. So it actually comes from here because we have actuals, phrase and we have all the concatenated elements. So if we only pick, for instance, the previous year, so I unselect the target, you can see that now we have only the actual and previous year. So this one, it's coming from this phrase plus the PY because it's the only selected scenario. In this case, it's a single selection. Nevertheless, if you pick more items from this table, for instance, we also select the target, you can see that the previous year phrase is concatenated with the whatever was between those items, which is name and after that we have this target. If, for example, we would like to change it to the comma as an example, it can look like that. So I will confirm the changes, and you will see now that instead of seeing the and, we just see the comma, which make this distinction between consecutive scenarios. So basically, for the single selection, we can use the selected value. For the multi-selection, we can leverage the concatenate_x, for instance. And I quickly would like to show you one different example, like a supplemental one. This one, it's used directly within the title, but it's only like the sample use case. And this one is related with whatever we have as a row breakdown in using the field parameter. So we are able to pick whether the segment, country, customer, or multiple options should be analyzed within the table, and we can have the similar logic. So let's quickly find out how the title is built. So it's like the breakdown title. So this measure is actually used here, and we also using the, let's quickly check whether it's the same. It's the same. Yes, okay. So we're using the same logic here, and we are using the concatenate_x to bring all of these item names, in that case segment, country, customer. We're using the comma as a separator, and we are also using what is also important, and I didn't mention previously, we can also add a sorting order for this item. So in that case, we are using the row ID in ascending order. Also, this ID has been used for our scenario selection. So let's quickly jump to the to this example, which was discussed at the beginning. And if we go here, it was the multi-selection. This one. You can also see that we're using the ID column from our table scenarios to sort it ascendingly. So in that case, we are making the sort order exactly as we have in a table. So the previous year, for example, is getting the number 1, the target is getting number 2, and so on. If you have more scenarios, they can be like consecutively displayed in a subtitle and so on. So basically that's it. The selected value is the first option, the concatenate is our second option, and we can strategically use that either like in annotations, either in titles, subtitles, and so on, and it should work fine. Of course, we can adjust it, adapt it, use additional phrases, and so on to create our use case. So for today, everything I wanted to share with you, and have a great day or night. Take care. Bye.